Ultimately, the fallback from ATI is CISOKEV. CISOKEV is the kind of world standard of whenever someone gets attacked and reports it to CISOKEV, now the world knows about it, it's out there. So at the very least, we're as good as CISOKEV. But in reality, ATI is far better than CISOKEV, not only at producing early warning of exploits and attacks that are happening, but also in weeding out all the stuff that you really don't need to care about as much because it's there, it's a vulnerability, maybe it's critical in its rating, but in reality it's not being used because it's too complicated, because there's no actual access to it, and a bunch of other reasons that are just filling your queue with noise. In a good implementation, I would say that on average, ATI does two things at once. It gives you early warning on thousands of different attack vectors and vulnerabilities, while at the same time cutting down about 98% of the vulnerabilities your vulnerability management team is dealing with that just don't matter as much. They're not relevant, they're not being exploited right now, they're not something you should be thinking about the same severity as some of those other ones.
Welcome, Nadir. It's so good to see you.
You as well. Thanks for having me.
I was thinking this morning when I was getting ready for the podcast that we've known each other 7 years. It's amazing how fast time goes by and how much Armis has grown in 7 years. It's just remarkable. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. So here today to talk about, I'm so excited about this topic, right? I've been in cyber for 2 decades. And, in that time, the common question is, I wish I knew what the next threat was so I could harden my environment appropriately. Short of a crystal ball, we haven't been able to do that until now. And so I'm excited to talk to you about why we can do that, how we do predictions around the next threats very, very accurately with a lot of precision. Unlike what we've had in the past around tips or threat intelligence platforms, this is very predictive, very accurate, and really ahead of CISA or NIST. So not to give too much away or steal your thunder, but just wanted to sort of set the table for our conversation. So I'll hand it over to you for an introduction.
Thank you, Pam. And 7 years is a long time. You've seen us, I think, evolve quite a bit during that time. And we've enjoyed a very good partnership with you as well. Like I'm sure a lot of the viewers know. I'm the CTO and co-founder at a company called Armis. And we deal a lot with this whole idea of, to your point, what are the next threats or what are the things that I should be looking at when I'm looking at my own attack surface? How to best prioritize, how to weed out what are the credible threats and what are the things that we need to look at versus a lot of the different vulnerabilities and things that exist in my environment that might not be. Armis has been around for around 9 years now, and during that time, it's built up a huge customer base and deployment. Today, we serve over 40 of the Fortune 100s, and generally we see around the globe about 5 billion assets that are being monitored in real time for threats. As you can imagine, that gives us quite an interesting view on who is getting attacked by what, which threat actors out there are operating right now, what are they up to and what are they doing, and generally try to learn trends and ideas from that vast network in real time and throw in kind of just a dose of AI into that, and you have something pretty remarkable. And to your point, the technology exists today to do things that we've not been able to do until now. So definitely looking forward into kind of diving a little bit more into that today. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and especially given how active threat actors are these days, it's an interesting topic for sure.
Yeah, it is. And I have to just say that my group is my group of 50 Fortune 500 CISOs are highly aware of your ability to do this and are very excited. So I've become familiar with this. And, usually where the conversation seems to start is around tips, threat intelligence platforms. Not that what you're doing is analogous to a tip, but that's all we've had in the past. And so it's sort of like stating why is there so much unhappiness or discontent with tips, and what is, sort of transition from there into what you're doing around ATI. That's the name of your product, Actional Threat Intelligence. And so let's just start with why it's not working today.
So that's a big topic to kind of unpack, but you touched on a very significant point. Most CISOs out there, most security organizations don't like necessarily their tips. They don't find it extremely useful to be drowned in mountains of information. And really, I think that the operative word here to think about as we dissect this is that word actionable. When we set out and talked about ATI or early warning or things like that, that word actionable is an incredibly important one, because most tips out there, SOCs, like security operations centers and security organizations in general, they subscribe and get many of these. Lots of different feeds, lots of different information. It ranges from stuff being scraped from the dark web to things that relate to a keyword of your organization's name out there and who's talking about what. But if you're a large organization, then that creates a ton of noise. And not only does it create a ton of noise that you now need to prioritize, it's also not actionable in the sense that it doesn't tie into a particular vulnerability, a particular asset, a particular thing that you have in order to truly action it. Lots of times, these are wild goose chases. You walk around and try to take the information you get, analyze, understand, look in your environment, find whatever it is that it's related to. And the noise and the signal to noise ratio is incredibly bad when it comes to these kinds of things. So I'll give a real world example. So one of the head of our threat intelligence, who comes from a firm called CTCI that we'll talk about in a bit, that's the basis of our kind of ATI product. He used to work for a very large manufacturer. And when he came in, they gave him like the responsibility of being in charge of threat intelligence. And the first thing he did was he went to the vulnerability management team and asked them, okay, how many vulnerabilities do you have? Like, you, from all the scanners, from everything combined. He's like, they come back with roughly around 2 million or so that pass the filter. It's like, okay, I have nothing to do with that kind of information. 2 million vulnerabilities will take me years to solve and not very useful. So he goes to the threat intelligence group and asks them, okay, what feeds do you have? They have 900 feeds that they pull in. Is that helpful to them? Not one bit. That's a ton of noise on top of already a ton of noise for vulnerabilities. So the reality is there has to be something better to do than this. And the operative word, like I said, is making it actionable. Armis and ATI takes a vastly different approach. It's not about let's collect everything under the sun that has some sort of relation to you. It's actually the other way around. Let's track the threat actors and let's track the vulnerabilities that are out there and try to answer a much more specific question. What vulnerabilities are getting exploited right now out there that are relevant to you? Specifically, what's relevant to you, but in the context of security findings or vulnerabilities that are being exploited truly in the wild right now. That is a specific question that relates directly to what you can do about it. Like if you had a crystal ball, to your point, and you knew what the next log4shell is, what the next bluekeep is, if you knew that ahead of time, truly and accurately, you'd have time to react. You would have an early warning where others do not. So the ability to come in and resolve for that, come in and do actionable work for that is a very, very meaningful thing. And I can kind of double click on pretty much any statement there, but at a higher sense, imagine if you had early warning, but at the same time, true exploitability prioritization of the vulnerabilities in your stack based on your environment so that you can also weed out all the noise, all the stuff that, yeah, it's there in those 2 million vulnerabilities, but it doesn't matter because there's either no path to it or it's a very irrelevant vulnerability that no one is actually using out there. So it's a way less of a priority than something that is being used.
So well said. I love that context. And it does sound a little magical, right? So I think probably to sort of to take the mystery out of it so we can, have our viewers be able to grasp this. I would love to hear about how you're uniquely doing this because nobody else is doing it. I mean, this is why I love cyber is when I see something like this that really changes the landscape and gives us something powerful to act on. So let's look under the hood a bit and share with our viewers how you're making this happen.
Okay, so I like to say always to your point that nothing is magic. It's all physics at the end of the day. So let's talk about the physics of it. How exactly did that happen, and what changed in the technology landscape that suddenly allows doing something that does, to your point, sound very magical. So there's two things combined that make this happen. Number one, I kind of called out the fact that Armis has a very unique data set at its disposal. Over 5 billion assets out there by different companies. Imagine the biggest airlines, the biggest banks, the biggest DoD or federal agencies, all the folks who normally get attacked all the time. So Armis has an interesting lens and view into what's the global landscape. Imagine a map for a second of all the different attack vectors and all the things that are happening. Armis has some pretty unique information in that regard. So that kind of starts the chain a little bit. But the real magic or the kind of real interesting physics that basically operates is through the lens of technology that was acquired from a small company called CTCI about a year ago. What they did was the following. They combined generative AI or LLMs to scour through all that same dark web, threat intelligence, all this stuff coming from different sources, but do it not to find keywords or to find names of different vulnerabilities or things like that, but instead look for intent. Analyze for the characterization of the conversation itself. Analyze for what is that conversation exactly about? Is it about just, okay, someone's talking about a certain vulnerability, or are they right now buying an exploit? Are they just generally referring to a brand name, or are they talking right now about aggressively attacking that brand name? Essentially, leverage new technology in the form of LLMs over old school type intelligence. So that's number one. But number two,
can I ask real quick on that? So just to clarify for everybody. So when you say you're listening or you're, listening to what the adversary is talking about, so you're listening into to channels, or I don't know what the right way to do that.
Yeah, a variety of different sources, but different channels. Some of them are very specific access. There's a whole intelligence component to this that requires pertaining or requiring that information in the first place. But the analysis is where things get really, really interesting, because the ability today for large language models and Gen AI to figure out intent and not just flag keywords or do things like that is very important. Imagine for a second that it's like instead of looking for all the phone calls in the world that say the word bomb and president, for instance, you actually had an analysis of, is that just randomly someone talking to someone and just talking about those keywords, or is this a conversation about actually planting a bomb in the White House or doing something with intent? So conceptually, that's number one. But number two is where things get really, really interesting. That same AI technology allows today to build what we call smart honeypots. Honeypots are a concept that is very old, like it doesn't exist from yesterday. This is a concept of building something that looks like another device or another asset or another attack surface in order to attract attackers to attack it, and through that learn something about the attacker. Honeypots are a tried and true idea, but they've always been quote unquote dumb. They've always been programmed to do something. They were programmed to look like a laptop or to look like something else. With the advent of Gen AI, we've been able to build smart honeypots, things that can adapt in real time to whatever is happening with the attacker, things that can take advantage of all the information I mentioned before, be it all those assets getting attacked that Armis sees, all that threat intel that's coming in and intent, and able to, on the fly, build entire fleets of smart honeypots that can form themselves into different attack surfaces. So for instance, Armis is seeing a very prominent airline somewhere getting attacked right now by a threat actor with a specific set of vulnerabilities and exploits. Boom, within seconds, there's a whole fleet of these smart honeypots spun up that look like another airline and are essentially out there trying to attract attackers to attack them. Now, and this is a little bit more into the weeds here, but attacks in the real world, they don't just happen overnight. Threat actors train for them. They do weapon testing well before that. They build and hone their exploit kits well before that. The whole system is designed to attract that. Basically, get attackers to attack you well before they attack whoever the intended target is. Capture these early signals in order to build a data set of what are threat actors looking at? What are the new and shiny things that are out there that are being tested upon? And where were they successful? Cross-reference that with everything Armis sees in the world, and you get the world's most unique early warning data set for anything that's being actually leveraged in the wild by threat actors. And the beautiful thing is it works really well. There's a lot of data to support that, and we can get into a lot of the weeds on that as well. But ultimately, there is a very, very effective system here in being able to understand things well before they happen by leveraging the fact that the threat actors themselves need to go through a process before they actually carry out the attack.
So interesting, because it makes me think about, not to go backwards here or digress, but one of the reasons that threat intelligence platforms have disappointed so much is that there's so many false positives. And so what you've just described, leads me to believe there's no false positives because you have, the honeypot has proven that it can be weaponized.
Right. In essence, instead of just guessing or doing statistical information, everything is validated. Like to your point, as opposed to statistical approaches for exploitability, which are much more popular today. There's the well-known score called EPSS, which is essentially a probabilistic score of exploitability. It's a step in the right direction. We're talking about exploitability at least, but it's statistical by nature and it is incredibly prone to false positives and false negatives. Basically, there's attacks that are marked with a high EPSS score that don't ever happen, and vice versa. There are things that are missed by the EPSS score that do happen in real life. So I'll kind of break that out for a second. ATI has no false positive because everything that it sees, everything Armis produces as that type of early warning is validated, right? Some attacker, some threat actor actually took the time, built an exploit kit, and ultimately attacked one of those smart honeypots with it, successfully gaining access. So there's no false positives because this is real information. It's real time, it's up to date, and it's constantly changing the different scores based on what you should know about. Now, false negative wise, are there things that get missed? Obviously, attackers don't have to attack our honeypots. Now, we have really good recall rates on that and very good statistics to support the fact that we catch a lot of this stuff, but no system is perfect and we don't catch everything. However, there's always, ultimately, the fallback from ATI is CISOs. CISOs is the kind of world standard of whenever someone gets attacked and reports it to CISOs, now the world knows about it, it's out there. So at the very least, we're as good as CISOs. But in reality, ATI is far better than CISOs, not only at producing early warning of exploits and attacks that are happening, but also in weeding out all the stuff that you really don't need to care about as much because it's there, it's a vulnerability, maybe it's critical in its rating, but in reality, it's not being used because it's too complicated, because there's no actual access to it, and a bunch of other reasons that are just filling your queue with noise. In a good implementation, I would say that on average, ATI does two things at once. It gives you early warning through all the methodologies I just mentioned on thousands of different attack vectors and vulnerabilities, while at the same time cutting down about 98% of the vulnerabilities your vulnerability management team is dealing with that just don't matter as much. They're not relevant. They're not being exploited right now. They're not something you should be thinking about the same severity as some of those other ones.
interesting because so not only for the first time do we have the ability to understand what threats are coming so that we can, harden our environment, but also you can cut the noise because our teams are running around trying to fix everything when you really only need to fix the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. So, wow, that's a huge, it's a huge breakthrough. So maybe you can give us a couple examples of ones that you've predicted and allowed your customers to shut that vulnerability down. And also, you touched on us 2 questions. You touched on CISOs. You have some statistics around vulnerabilities that you've predicted ahead of that list, and I think that's super interesting. So maybe you can touch on that as well.
Absolutely. Let's start with some tangible examples that would kind of give an idea of real world attacks out there and real world exploits and how much of an early warning is early warning. So some of the prominent ones, Bluekeep was 10 days early. So early warning of 10 days to the not just the existence of that vulnerability, but the weaponization of it, right? Threat actors and nation states started using it, and early warning of 10 days can mean a world of difference. Same goes, and that's maybe a very, very well-known example, but it kind of gets the point across. Log4Shell, the very famous Log4j vulnerability that the second it was out was getting exploited left and right, nearly 2 months earlier were the golden source for the IOCs. And not only is there early warning here, think about how the early warning here works. Honeypots just got attacked by an actual threat actor that's trying to leverage these and exploiting it with a weaponized exploit kit. What that means on our end is that we don't just get the early warning information of this vulnerability is getting exploited. We also have automatically generated TTPs, detections of a variety of different tools for that vulnerability exploit. So not only are you getting early warning that this is happening, you're getting credible detections that would allow your SOC to detect any kind of use of that within your environment. One last one that I think is, because it's been in the news quite a bit, is Volt Typhoon. Volt Typhoon is one of those different nation-state actor attacks that are very prolific and very out there. Early warning and kind of the ATI technology provided 55 days of early warning for that as well. And these are very, very important numbers. You started off this podcast today by talking about what if we had a crystal ball, right, for doing things. Now, again, this isn't magic. It's very, very grounded here in the physics of how I explained it. But the reality is it does give a unique advantage to defenders here versus how attackers carry out attacks. And getting that early warning, not for everything under the sun, but for the specific attack vectors that are relevant for your environment, is a massive advantage when it comes to both vulnerability management teams and their work day in, day out, but also the SOC as they come to prioritize what are the threats that are coming in, what to respond to, and which alerts should get the most attention right now.
Absolutely. It's interesting too, because I think, coming back to the numbers a little bit, one of the things that the last thing my CISOs and their teams need are tens of thousands of things to look at. But what you're really doing is narrowing it down to hundreds, right? It's not in the thousands. It's hundreds. And then you make that relevant to their environment. So it really becomes a subset of really critical vulnerabilities that go to the very top of the list. So can you talk a little bit about how it's a service. I think this is important to say. So you're providing a service, but you're not just dropping it, and saying, here, go figure it out. You're actually helping them figure out what parts of those vulnerabilities or what subset of those vulnerabilities are relevant to them. And so maybe talk a little bit about how you deliver this.
So there's a couple of different aspects to this that are worth mentioning. First of all, you're right. There's a product and technology here, but there's also a service behind it as well. We can provide the information I just mentioned through a service that can work with your SOC or your MSSP or your vulnerability management team to do that. So the reality is it comes with experts who can not only take advantage of this information, but also
action it or kind of work with you to do that. So there's definitely that part to it. But if we kind of go back to the how of it, to your point, so we mentioned all the information Armis has about the threat component of it, right? Understanding threat actors, understanding what they're doing, understanding all that piece and kind of what are they interested in and how to provide you early warning. But there's another component to this that is very, very powerful and can come in, which is understanding your own environment. If we kind of backtrack to the beginning of the conversation, I mentioned Armis monitors today over 5 billion assets. The reason why that came to be in the first place is that Armis is a tool for mapping out your own attack surface from inside, understanding every asset you have. What is it? Who owns it? Who's using it? What are the different security controls you have for it? Vulnerabilities, things like that. It's essentially a platform that provides capabilities like Chasm, for instance, on the one hand, like being able to provide an asset inventory of everything you have, but also lots of offshoots into the worlds of OT, medical device security, stuff like that. But the point, if I kind of have to bring it back, is Armis looks at all of these assets and is able to generate a credible real-time view of your own attack surface and the attack paths to critical assets. So if Armis understands your assets, understands the criticality and the business meaning of those, like which assets actually matter to you, and the attack paths that can lead into those assets, if you take that component and couple it with everything we talked about just now with threat actors, you get an incredibly powerful element, because now it's no longer just about what are the threat actors doing. It's also coupled with, should I care about that? Because one of my critical assets is on an attack path that can be leveraged through these vulnerabilities. If not, again, it lowers significantly how much I should care about that. And to top it all off, the way this service, to your point, is provided in that means is you can definitely consume this as essentially a feed of information. You can. But lots of our customers, what they end up doing is they tie into this their vulnerability scanner, their EDR, their cloud security platform, all the stuff that's generating the vulnerability information, tie it all in and let Armis do the work for you. Marry all the information about the assets, marry all the information about the threat actors, all that stuff together, and just give you a complete view at any given point in time of exactly what you should be worried about and what you should be looking at. That becomes the kind of the crown jewel of this. Like, to your point, how do folks end up consuming this? Imagine if your vulnerability management team could wake up every day and look at a dashboard that actually gives them credible, actionable information on what to look at right now based on all of these different data points combined. That's really the mission that Armis is out to fill, and that's really how a lot of folks end up consuming this. Plus, to your point, the ability to come in and action this and get experts to work with you or to do the work on top of this for you.
It's so interesting because I cannot tell you how many times over the last 2 decades I've been asked, all I really want to know is what the next threat is. And just to make this, a little bit even more real, I think I'm going to come back to that. What I think is so interesting around the numbers and your ability to predict accurately without false positives, vulnerabilities that are not on CISO's radar or even on NIST. And maybe name it some numbers, because it brings it to the forefront and brings it to like a place where everybody can really understand how powerful it is.
Basically, at any given point in time, there are lots of attack vectors and vulnerabilities that ATI is tracking, but haven't even manifested yet in the real world. Some of these are very recent. Like, if we look at even just the last month or so, there are hundreds, I think in the range of about 400 that have not popped in on CISOKEV yet, but are on the ATI list. And if you go back further, there's quite a few that there's real world attacks. They've either never been reported on CISOKEV, or it's things that are still gearing up towards it. So there's lots of those. But the more important thing to me is actually looking at the precision rates of something like ATI versus some of the other leading metrics pre-CISOKEV, like EPSS. So if we look at some of these, if we look at EPSS kind of versus ATI, EPSS in total misses or is missing around 1,400 plus real attacks that are happening out there. So if you look at different versions of EPSS,
even the latest one, EPSS version 3, still missed and is missing about 75% of all attacks out there. And if you look at the queue of different things that already exist within ATI, meaning a valid threat actor has leveraged this against actual honeypots prior to carrying out an attack, there's over 1,200 of these total in the queue that are unique. And that, to me, is also a very interesting stat when you think about how we do security today. A lot of security is very reactive. Like, yeah, you go through your vulnerability list, but ultimately, CISOs, something gets reported, that's your source of truth. Now you're in a highly reactive mode. Now we need to fix it before you get hacked by that. So I think that going back to the whole early warning thing, that list is gold. It's a list of actual attacks carried out by actual threat actors that you can use to then cross-reference with your environment and see where to shore up things. But yeah, to your point, there's lots that gets missed by anything from CISOKEV to EPSS, and that's the part that ATI really focuses on.
Yeah, super powerful information we've just never had before. And, we're all wanting to be proactive in security, but, historically we've had to be reactive because we just know about it too late. So super helpful. I know we're running out of time. I'd love maybe just a final question, and maybe it's obvious from our discussion today, but, Armis is growing their platform, right? You've been known, for a long time as an IoT security vendor. This platform that you've built out around vulnerability and vulnerability management is so critical. I mean, it's still the bane of the existence of my companies, of just trying to stay ahead of the vulnerabilities. It's impossible to do. And so you've really built out something special, and ATI fits, gracefully into that platform. And I'm sure that's why you acquired them, but I didn't know if you wanted to say any final thoughts about your platform and what you're doing at Armis to expand way beyond what you're well known for today.
Well, it's funny that in a lot of ways, our original mission hasn't really changed, but what changed over the years is our understanding of it and the scope of that question. So 9 years ago when we started, we heard from anyone we could talk to, CISOs, CIOs, IT managers, OT managers, it really didn't matter. Every one of these, if they had to express a pain in their environment that they could relate to, we don't know what we have. We don't understand how our environment even looks like, let alone be able to quantify it for risk or track anything we should be doing. But the fundamental pain was a pain of visibility. And early on when we started, we told ourselves, okay, if the world was just filled with endpoints, this would have been a solved problem. So the problem must be all the other stuff, all the IoT, all the OT, all the medical devices out there, all the special stuff. And we focused a lot of our origins, a lot of our kind of original years on building something that could detect and fingerprint and understand every asset and device out there, no matter what it is. It could be an endpoint, but it could be IoT or other things like that. And we got, I think, pretty well known for that piece of the technology. But as the years went by and as we understood the problem in a more nuanced way, we started realizing that it's a multi-layered problem. It starts with detect or understand or discover everything within my environment, but it quickly grows into combine and enrich and contextualize and give me a complete view of every single asset that I have within my environment in one place. I don't want to go to 50 different systems to understand what an asset is or what a vulnerability is or what each of them has to say about it. Combine everything into one place and give me one view with kind of 360 view of every single asset all in one place. But having achieved that mission or kind of progressing significantly on that, the next question is, okay, you're showing me everything. What's important? What should I actually be looking at right now? And I think into that's where we started really going through vulnerability management, cyber exposure management, and into that platform, ATI or CTCI as they were known before were a very easy fit. They were something that brought unique information that allows you to prioritize and understand exactly what you need to do. And a lot of the focus for us these days is really around how do we help you remediate? How do we help you push forward and solve these problems and start speaking in terms of what have I fixed and not what did I discover?
I think that's a holistic platform of you put it in and you start chipping away actionably at exactly the kind of things you need to solve to give you the biggest bang for the buck. That's what Armis is. It's entirely around left of boom, before things happen, manage the risk, prevent the threats from even happening in the first place, versus a pure detection and response kind of right of boom approach that's very prevalent in a lot of different security organizations. Become proactive, not just reactive. It's not just more cost effective to operate that way. It's just that much more effective in general, especially against the evolving threats that are out there.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I have to just say this. It may seem like a detail, but devices. You asset is the right word, right? People think devices when they think of Armis, but it's applications, it's OS. It doesn't matter. It's assets, and so it's really understanding your entire environment, and then and then overlaying that with the vulnerability criticality, so that our teams are more efficient and effective. I mean, we can't get ahead of the problem with just throwing more people at it. We had to fix it, and that's what you guys did. And super excited. So, thank you so much, Nadir. I don't know if you have any final thoughts or if we should end here, but we're running over on time because it's such an important topic. But thank you for joining.
You as well. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, great.